Hey, everybody, welcome back to your Dawn of Autonomy podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting, and publisher at Autonomy Global. We are knee deep in a month we dedicated to the theme of energy, thanks to Volatus Aerospace. And frankly, we couldn't have an energy month without this guy being on the show. This is Sean Guerre from the Energy Drone Robotics Coalition. If you haven't heard of him, I don't know where you've been, and you need to start following him now. We're going to be talking about all the things EDR on the show, and you're going to be absolutely wowed if you're not really tapped into this community. You need to be soon. So, Sean, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Don. Excited to be here. Looking forward to talking about all things energy and drones, data, and robots today.
Absolutely. So Sean has been a great friend of the show. He's been on, gosh, Sean, I feel like every year, at least for the last 3, maybe 4 years. I've been going to his Energy Drone Robotics Coalition Summit in Houston for as many years, if not more. That's upcoming. So we're going to cover all that. But Sean, before we do, just real quick, for those that don't know you, can you give them that 30-second elevator bio about yourself?
Sure, happy to do so. So I came from a background in oil and gas and technology and media. So the three ingredients that really made up what made sense when we launched Energy Drone Robotics Coalition 10 years ago to try to connect all the key stakeholders that they would be able to, share best practices, technology, and use cases in order to safely grow their programs. And that story has been the same for the last 10 years. Just a lot of the pieces in between have changed out as the technology and the projects have grown.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you about that arc of, how it has changed in terms of the technology using being used by the energy sector. But before we do that, I want to talk about Energy Drone and Robotics Coalition. So you started 10 years ago, as you said. I know training and education was a big part of the origin story there. But again, for those that don't know, how you guys started or why you even created EDR, can you fill them in a little bit about that?
Sure. So it was a very simple challenge that existed in the industry, but there were so many pieces to it. And that was the asset owner operators. So oil and gas, petrochemical, utilities, mining, everyone in critical infrastructure around energy was starting to look at the adoption of drones into their programs for survey, mapping, and inspection. And there were just dozens and dozens of questions about the technology, the OEMs, primarily around hardware and safely training teams to be able to use it. And do we do it in-house or outsource? So that was a lot of the early days was really just around solving that question and kind of sharing best practices when everybody in, at least in our industry, was pretty much a pioneer. So they were just starting. And that was really the, I would say nexus of why the coalition was started, and that was really what we focused on in order to grow and help the industry.
Yeah, I'm going to do public math. So 10 years, 2016, that's when Part 107 came out. So, I
Mhm.
know just having come to your event multiple times and just being in this space, that the oil and gas community or the energy sector, critical infrastructure, as you say, they were a little bit hesitant at first in terms of adopting some of these technologies, just because I think of the compliance requirements and the stakes, what's at risk in a lot of these facilities. How would you describe, the arc over the last 10 years in terms of adoption of not only drones, but robotics by that community?
Yeah, so obviously it's been tremendous. And I mean, I think if you look at not just obviously for the Energy Drone Robotics Coalition or EDRC, as we like to say, the EDRC, of course, is going to be very pro drones and adoption around energy. But you look at some of the public sources, right? Let's look at Drone Industry Insights, right? DII. Every year they put out massive reports and surveys and studies around the industry. And I think for the last 5 years, for sure, energy and utilities is number one as far as the adoption. And then
Yeah.
what's the fastest growing typically is energy and utilities. So I think it showcases what we've seen, which is most people were in the early days trying to figure it out or launching proof of concept, et cetera. And now we see absolutely large fleets scaling, tremendous amount of use cases throughout their assets that they're utilizing drones and robots. And now, especially, they're all focusing on the data. So, regardless of how it's being collected, what type of sensor. So, I think we're definitely seeing widespread adoption. There are very few companies that are not utilizing drones or robots in any case. It's just a question of scaling, right? That's really where we are, I think, today.
Yeah, I that's my observation too, Sean, across all of the events I've gone to beyond yours. That geospatial crowd as example, whether it was Geo Week or GeoInt, I think everybody at this stage this year is in agreement, like, all right, we're not really talking about the technology so much anymore. We're talking about the data. And we're talking about how to leverage that data for actionable insights, to do something with it. And I think that's where we see, this explosion of AI. Not, it's everywhere, but like in terms of digital twins or like, that data analysis, we're seeing it. And in terms of the hardware itself, I know you started in the drone space, but when we say drone, right? Robots, think of uncrewed, underwater vehicles, UUVs, the UGVs, the spot dogs have been running around your show floor for years now. And, increasingly, I think your show, other than CES, I'll be honest with you, CES was robots all over the place this year. But your show, of all the shows I've been to, Sean, has featured humanoids, for the last couple of years, unlike other shows. I was just in Japan. We were talking about this before the show for the Japan Drone and AAM, and they actually had a humanoid, exhibitor. And I was like, interesting. This is the Japan Drone and AAM Expo, and they've got a humanoid exhibitor here. So tell me, kind of what you're seeing. Let's start with AI because there's so much to cover, right? Let's start with AI. Everybody's talking about it. You're seeing it on the data side. Where would you say AI is making the biggest impact in the energy ops for the stakeholders that you're working with?
Sure. So yeah, it's fascinating, obviously, to watch the evolution of that. And that mini arc has been, very rapid. So we see AI taking place, in our industry, really around two main areas. So let's say the biggest, I think, as far as deployment, real world use case, is you're seeing it around the analyzing of data, right? They're looking for anomalies. We have this tremendous, like we were saying, amount of data, the tsunami of data that's coming from all these sensors, all these robots, all these drones. And how do they actually make that actionable? Meaning, how do I, if I'm a utility, find faults that I need to remedy in order to prevent a wildfire potentially, or something in a plant that is going to be needed to be replaced in the next shutdown turnaround cycle? How do I identify those things and determine what the value is of executing on those right away? Do I send a crew out now, or
Right.
in a month, or in a year? So they have to be able to look at these things consistently. AI is able to do that because it's able to then consistently look at it and start to look at other anomalies in the LLMs. And then it can basically tell you it's time to fix it now, it's time to fix it later. And in the background, AI agents are able to connect that data, make the analysis, possibly put a human in the loop there, especially if it's an inspector that's needed in some area. And then it jumps over to the ERP system, right? In order to actually deploy the ticket. So the work order happens and the crew rolls and goes out to that
Wow.
well or that offshore platform or that transmission or substation. So yeah, so AI is enabling looking at the data, connecting to the current legacy software systems, and actually scheduling and deploying and then getting feedback from that crew via either digital twins or tablets that they're in the workforce connected, and then it goes back into the system. So they know we replace this pump or that transistor, what have you. So I think that's the number one way we're seeing it today around what I would call maybe predictive maintenance. And then the other thing that you're seeing on the OEM side, it's the brains. I mean, when
Oh
you're
yeah.
looking at detect and avoid, people getting ready for part 108, BV loss going further and further, the drone dock swarms. I mean, you name it, all these complex ways that people want to deploy robots in the air, ground, and sea. And like you say, we cover from the stars to the seafloor. If it's autonomous, we cover it.
Yep.
And so in order to do that, those have to be smarter machines and they have to be able to be taught, in a very rapid way and all the way to humanoids, which are probably some of the best ways of deploying AI as the brain of a robot and Spot and the other quads as well. So yeah, so I'd say those are the two ways that we see AI being deployed very rapidly, and we're seeing some real gains out of it immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say one of the other hottest topics besides AI is counter drone, and especially in the critical infrastructure space, for the energy sector. So tell us, kind of in terms of even just between last year and this year,
Mhm.
the radical difference you're seeing in terms of people now scrambling around looking for solutions.
Sure. So last year, we obviously had the conflict in Europe with Ukraine and Russia was starting to impact energy assets. That was starting to be part of the issue is they were deploying weapons against each other's energy assets.
Yep.
And so that started opening the conversation. And at the same time, we started to see some surveillance, penetrations,
Mm,
et cetera, around transmission substations, New Jersey, the big drone thing going
yeah.
on. So we
Yep.
started seeing around Air Force fields, et cetera. So critical infrastructure and or defense. We started seeing some people that seem to be testing what you might or might not be able to do, or surveillance of what's going on at a petrochemical plant, et cetera. So I would say it was all at that level, kind of a low level threat in the US and US assets that there were a lot of questions. So I would say that's a year ago. So it started becoming kind of questions. It was only a couple sessions in our annual summit, and it was probably a half dozen articles across a year's worth of weekly newsletters. So
Right.
it was not very prevalent. I would say a year ago, it was kind of a low boiling point at that point.
Yep. And now
Now it's boiling. It's hot. I
the
mean, we
frog
obviously.
has jumped. Frog can't jump out of the pot.
No, it's totally shifted. And I think you have two or three, obviously. The biggest is what's happened in the Middle East. Obviously, we now have lots of energy assets directly impacted right off the get-go. Everything from data centers and other types of critical infrastructure directly to the energy assets, pipelines, petrochemical, loading, unloading for oil and gas, LNG. So you have obviously direct conflict where drones and counter drone technology are having to be deployed in order to either assault or protect those assets. Those assets also, a lot of times, are joint venture partnerships
Yep.
with super majors. So you have NOCs and super majors. So you now have gotten a lot of people who are on our advisory board, very prevalent in the Energy Drone and Robotics Coalition universe who have assets directly impacted. So you have now, I think, a much higher interest. Then dovetail that with an area that I know you know very well, the regulatory side, right?
Yep.
We're starting to see warnings coming out from different organizations. We're starting to see NPRMs on the possibility of being able to deploy something beyond just detection, starting to go into that mitigation area. We're
Yeah.
starting to see critical infrastructure, including energy assets, being put in a different context as to what they may or may not be able to do as far as monitoring and or keeping drones or other nefarious things away.
Yeah.
So you put all that together, conflate it into what's, I think, become much bigger. I would say the first half of this year, Don, I'm guessing we've run, easily 10 to 15 stories already about counter UAS and energy security. And
Yeah.
I don't see that slowing down.
No, in fact, I know you're incorporating that into your summit this year as a standalone, kind of, I don't want to call it a workshop, but like an all day focus area. So we'll talk about that in a second. But before we do, all right, so AI, counter UAS, if you were going to pick the top three, would the third be regulatory change in terms of the biggest things happening so far in 2026 in this half of the year? I mean, we are almost at the halfway point as you look back. Or is there like a third thing that you would pick as like the other big thing?
Yeah, so I think you've hit definitely, we've hit on the top two right off the bat.
Yeah,
As far as what's going on in those areas around geopolitics, which involves the counter UAS, AI certainly continues to grow, and especially around making data actionable, like we talked about at the beginning. So I would say those are by far the largest areas that are being discussed today in a big sense.
yeah.
And we're excited about doing the forum, the Energy Security and Counter UAS Forum, as a way to bring the industry together.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you think about how far we've come, surely there's still gaps. So what would you say in terms of the energy sector? What is the biggest or are the biggest gaps in terms of drones and robotics for the sector right now, deployment and where it should be?
Yes, and in fact, I'm going to go one more. I'm sorry that I didn't
That's
discuss,
okay.
but it is in the gaps as well. Supply chain has become a
Ah,
big, I would say, and I would say that probably was bubbling up quite a bit end of last year,
yeah,
or even at last year's summit, but that's now still very top of mind. Figuring out your supply chain, figuring out your partners, keeping up with the regulatory. Speaking of that, that's obviously been a big impact around the FCC covered list. Who's not on it, how to get on it, what you are going to be able to fly for how long will you be able to get software or access to any upgrades. So there's a lot of question marks there that have impacted, because energy is flying, as you would imagine, very large fleets, right? And they're
yeah,
flying them daily. And so there's a lot of drones. And then same thing in the plants with robots. And there's some new regulatory things going on there, that could impact the supply chain and partners and things like that. So I think that's still very top of mind. So I would just want to say, as far as a gap, that's something that's shown up that
yeah.
is becoming very critical for energy companies and utilities to solve, as well as the entire industry, I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we had Jennifer Richter and Haley Peacher from Aiken did a special webinar before our Law Tech Connect about 2 months ago about the FCC covered list. And people, I mean, Jennifer has been screaming from the mountaintops for years, like Spectrum, it matters, like you should care about these things. And now and people still don't fully appreciate. And interesting, Sean, just in Japan, it was also palpable there. This idea, I met a group that's making engines and they were from Taiwan, right? And they're like, yeah, we're here because we're the alternative to Chinese, engines and parts. And people don't realize that even propellers like are on the covered list in the US. So if they extend that to robots, like that current proposal that's being, bannered around, it's going to make it really, really interesting, right? A lot of the robot makers, other than maybe Boston Dynamics, and we're talking, the UGVs, and what's the other one that goes again that has the other spot dog? They were in a law.
You've got several Ghost Robotics, Athlon
Ghost
Robotics.
Robotics. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Other than them, you know, I'm not aware of a ton of companies making humanoids in the US. Like China's all over that. Like that was CES, and we're talking big ones, like, like the ones that were in that movie with Hugh Jackman, where the robots were boxing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Unitree.
absolutely.
Yeah, Unitree. Tesla's saying they're making one, of course, they're US, but it's just really interesting times in terms of the geopolitical regulatory nexus there.
Yeah,
And I agree that it's creating gaps that are going to be really hard to fill if we don't figure this out in a really good way and quickly. Um,
right. And it impacts everyone. I mean, that's
it,
the other part of it. It's like, our asset owner operators certainly, but also the service companies who work, for them, for their inspection,
yeah,
surveying, and mapping, and the OEMs. And so, they have, typically kind of two main questions. How are they adapting, their long-term fleet procurement and maintenance strategies to
yep,
mitigate these supply chain disruptions?
yeah,
Then, they're looking at what are the alternatives? What's the cost? What's the performance? So if we are switching, what are we switching to? And I definitely have seen a growth of, I've never seen as many platforms exhibiting at our summit as this year from around
Yeah.
the world. I was
I,
really
I don't
blown.
doubt it. And, look, critical infrastructure is one of the big, let's just call it buckets, right? In terms of a market. Public safety, I think, is another, although I would go out on a limb and say their funding is frankly more limited. Everybody's chasing, Department of War dollars. Exponential was pretty obvious, when you walk that floor and how huge it was. I was just at Soft Week in Tampa, and the international presence there, because the Department of War actually has the authority, I think, to work with the FCC and get their own special exemptions to some of these policies. So it's really, really interesting times. But you're covering all of all of these things, Sean, because you guys cover it. And so I want to talk about EDR and the resources and the training that you put out. You mentioned your newsletter. Tell everybody a little. I mean, I subscribed early on. In fact, I forget who told me. I feel like it was Sean Pribble from Holland and Knight law firm. Somebody early on was like, "Hey, have you heard of this group? You need to sign up for the newsletter." And that's when I started following you very early in my company. I started in 2019. So tell everybody about your newsletter and kind of what they can expect from that.
You bet. And thank you for being a loyal reader. We
Yeah, I
appreciate
love
it.
it. I love your newsletter.
Absolutely. And contributor on occasion as well.
Yeah.
So we started the newsletter, I think it was once a month back then, and then it moved to twice monthly and then weekly. And we've kept it at that level. And basically, what we try to do is really come across with, in a little slightly irrelevant, maybe a little witty way, we try to come across the news that's just for our sector, right? Just for critical infrastructure, because obviously there are many great sources out there for information around
Yeah.
the drone industry
Yes.
and robotics industry, and they all have very good reasons and audiences. But for us, we wanted to distill it to, all right, well, things that may be very prevalent in entertainment or agriculture or public safety aren't necessarily made for industrial drones that and
Yes.
robots and data that we're going to have for our industries. So that's really step one, was just curating it. And then step two was starting to get original content that could be brought forth. And we brought in an editor, Megan Horn, who does a great job, I think, distilling what's going on that week. Thank you. She's
I love Megan.
awesome.
She is, you said irreverent, and I love her tone. She's just funny and makes everything interesting, but still at the same time serious, right? Like
Right.
there's just so much great information in your newsletter. And so I just remember also, Sean, when I talked to you, gosh, well, many times, but part of that origin story, that first little training session you had with less than 100 people. And now you're doing these, you do bots and brews, happy hours where there's training involved. You do workshops and you do the summit. Walk us through some of these training. We'll talk about the summit separately, but just walk us through some of your training, and especially this year, like, some of the newer ones that you put out.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do really is, over the last couple of years, is find other ways to be able to connect the industry. And
Yeah.
and so either we're doing that around a particular vertical. So like you said, AI last fall was a big question of how is it being deployed as far as for the analysis or on the OEM side. So
Yeah.
around physical AI primarily. So we
Yeah.
did a one-day forum on that and had a couple hundred folks come in, from around the U.S. to be able to talk about that very specific area. Or if it's something like the Energy Security Counter UAS Forum, something very specific. And we tend to do those face to face, but we also do them online so that we have the ability to do, live webinars for people where we do a roundtable. It's not just, kind of a regular webinar. We like to do live roundtables where people can ask questions around particular topics. And then we also brought up EDR Connect, which is a membership community, and they get together several times a year. They just did a spring industry roundtable, and we had about 40 of the industry leaders come together here in Houston to be able to talk through what some of the biggest challenges are to their programs, what they're trying to solve for, and then here's some updates about some new areas that don't get as much coverage sometimes, but are rapidly developing, such as drone cargo for our industry. that's a lot bigger in retail and some other medical, and there's some great use cases there. But in our area, it's just starting to get to where we're actually going to be seeing flights taking off from the Gulf Coast out to offshore platforms. And, so we're about to see some things that I think are going to be very exciting. So that's just a sub area. So we try to cover different verticals and bring different groups of people together. And Bots and Brews is typically just fun. And we've had a lot of requests to bring it around North America. So I believe we need to finally execute on that because
Yeah.
we kept pushing it back. And we've got some great friends in Oklahoma and in Colorado and in Calgary that have asked us to, let's do a Bots and Brews together. So I think we'd like to really take that on the road and make it just fun to bring all industry stakeholders together. So that's really kind of what we're trying to do with our live and online events that are live. And then obviously continue building the resources side where people can go back and look at sessions, look at information, reports that are available in the industry, as well as, we try to keep up every day on LinkedIn. Sylvia Ibarra does a great job on both our news, different sections of that, as well as LinkedIn in order to keep it very relevant. Also in that witty, irreverent tone that we like to use to try to stop the scroll and get people to, comment or give their thoughts and share insights. So I'd say LinkedIn is probably our biggest channel outside of news and the live events.
Yeah, I love what you do, Sean, because if I copied this, it wasn't consciously, right? Because you're one of the few conference or event organizers that tapes almost everything you do and puts it out as webinars or somehow puts that content out as an article or whatever, so that if for some reason someone can't make the live event or even can't dial in on demand or something like that, they can always look later and still benefit from that education. And I think that's so important. And I can't tell you how many places I've been where I'm sitting and watching some panel and I'm like, wow, this is so good. Like, why is this not being taped? Because people are missing it. And, so this, I tape my Law Tech Connect, put them out as Law Tech Connect online. You've been a part of that event. I just think it's so important. And I love that you do that kind of multimedia approach of you've got a live component, but you've got an article component and maybe a video component to really, not only get the word out to as many people as possible, but also in kind of ways that they might receive that information best, because we all learn differently, right? Some people are readers, some people are listeners, and you're hitting all of it. So I love what you do. I've been a fan for years, and keep doing all of it. So let's transition to the upcoming event, because this is your big one. It's annual. This is 10. Is this your
10th anniversary?
10th
Yes.
anniversary? So a big deal. I think we have a video to roll, so let's go ahead and roll that. And you talk us through this summit and what we can expect this year.
Sure, absolutely. So this is, a recap from last year, or highlight video. We like to call internally our sizzle reel.
Yep.
So, but it gives you a good overview. So you can see last year we brought almost 1,400 people together, and I
Wow.
think it was about 90 companies showcasing on the show floor. And like you say, it was everything from the data to the robots to drones, software, all of that. And this year, I think we're scaling it to something genuinely new. I mean, it really is for its 10th anniversary. I
Yeah.
think where the industry is, as well as where we are, it's amazing that we've got so many different groups coming together. We have with Energy Drone Robotics Summit, we've got our industrial AI group coming together, our industrial digital reality. So we have a full track just on industrial intelligence. Everything
Wow.
from digital twins, spatial intelligence, geospatial, geo AI, all that data talk now has its own track that it runs just as much as the energy drone and robotics does. So that's exciting for us because the value of that convergence for someone trying to understand how it all works from the reality capture with the robots and drones through the workflows to actionable data,
Yeah.
that can be analyzed. That process, that convergence or that pipeline of data, that's critical for energy companies and for the service companies and the OEMs. All the stakeholders have an impact on this. And we're bringing them all together this year. We're expecting almost 2,000 people to be coming together in Houston. And we've virtually sold out the exhibit floor. I think there's maybe 3 booths left.
Wow.
And we're up to 130 companies showcasing. So there are much larger shows by all means. These numbers are small in comparison. But for us in the energy industry, this is the biggest in the world. And we're really excited to be and honored to be the ones who get to host that this year in just a couple weeks here in Houston.
Yeah, and you also work with drone responders every year. When I remember when I first saw that, I was like, huh, that's interesting. Why are they here? And then it dawned on me that okay, these critical infrastructure owners, they have their own disasters that they have to contend with, and they have to know how to work with public safety and learn also from their best practices. So that really is a perfect fit. And then, as you mentioned, your counter UAS special session this year. Tell us a little bit about that. So how does it work, Sean? So many events do different things. In fact, the Japan one, I didn't know this before I went, but you had to like sign up in advance to go to their sessions, and they like quote unquote sold out, even though it was like free tickets, if you will, to sit in a presentation. Like there was no space. And so I was like, okay, I guess I should have figured that out before I went. So for your event, how does it work? There's like a full conference pass, there's an expo hall, there's all these different workshops and things. How do people kind of navigate that?
Yeah, we try to keep it pretty simple, and that may end up coming back to bite us depending on what you just described.
Yeah,
But if you think about it, we call it the all access. So anyone who buys a conference pass for any of our events that are happening at what we call Innovate Energy Week,
yeah,
that would be in 2 weeks. So Energy Drone Robotics Summit being one of the largest pieces of that, they can cross over. So in essence, the ability of the AI crowd to come into drone robotics and all of those to be able to go to digital reality, digital twins, they all cross over. So your
yeah,
pass gets you into all the conference sessions. And I guess I would put that kind of like Comic-Con. And when the room's full, the room's full.
yeah, yeah.
We're kind of guessing as to how many will be interested in the various topics, and I'm sure
Right.
we'll be correct on some and off on others. But
Yeah.
that's the simplest way to do that. And then we have 3 forums that are co-located, what we call co-located forums. So the
Mhm.
first one we have is the asset owner operator forum. That's easy. You only get in the room if you're an asset owner operator.
Okay.
So it's pretty simple, and that's the only one that we do exclusive for that group. Everything else is open to all stakeholders.
Okay.
Then there's the drone responders, and basically you're welcome to go into those sessions as well. You don't have to sign up in advance. We just scan you at the door. So we
Yeah.
are able to keep track because there is so much integration between us and what happens in the public safety sector around critical assets for wildfires and storms, as well as industrial incidents.
Yeah.
So it's a big piece, and I think people enjoy having that ability to go back and forth in and out of those sessions. And then the last one, the Energy Security and Counter UAS, which is our newest forum, same. Everybody who goes to the conference is able to go to that forum. So if you have a conference pass, you're able to go. We've moved it already once to a larger room, and we're kind of it's the largest room we can fit, and we're hopeful that we've got the number right.
Yeah, you're going to get a large crowd in there. I have no doubt. I mean, our Law Tech Connect, we had a couple sessions on Thursday morning, and I was a little nervous about that. It was my first time because that's a day when people start packing up and going home. And we had some obviously some great panels, and we had people coming to those, and especially the counter UAS one. That room, you saw the influx of new people. Like some people may
Mhm.
have left, but a whole new group, a wave of people came in for that. And it was, close to noon on Thursday. And I was just like, wow, okay, this is obviously people care, about this topic. So as they should, very important.
I
But
think you're right. Yeah, that's great to hear. And the only reason on our registration we had to create a special pass for the
yeah,
security forum and same with drone responders is that some people in public safety only want to go to that. And so
yeah,
they don't want an all access. So we make it simpler and less expensive. And then for the energy security, It was the physical security directors. See, don't think about that. For counter UAS and energy security, you really have two different groups at these large energy companies that are involved in this. And there
Yeah.
may be many more, but two primary. And one is your UAS group, who's dealing with a lot of the regulatory. They're often embedded within the aviation group, and they understand a lot of what they're doing with UAS on a daily basis. But then you also have the physical security directors, and that group doesn't typically come to UAS events because UAS is not a big part of what they do, but now it's becoming much larger, both tracking what they have, that should be in their airspace and tracking what shouldn't and how they deal with it. So we created special paths just for those physical security directors based on the request from our UAS leaders.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm really excited. You and I were talking. I'll be involved in a counter UAS panel on Wednesday, and then also a Beyond Visual Line of Sight panel with a lot of great experts on that Tuesday. Also, everybody out there, we'll be doing our Autonomy Global Network live from EDR Tuesday afternoon. Sean will be on that with a lot of other leaders. Echodyne actually is sponsoring that particular stream. So all of this is going to be on the Autonomy Global website and the AGN YouTube channel. So check all that out. Really great stuff. Really excited, Sean. Now we're again at that halfway point in 2026. Big event coming up in 2 weeks. Is there anything about that event that you wanted to tell people that we haven't talked about before we talk about what else you have kind of in the pipeline for 2026 for the rest of the year?
No, I think like everybody should look at it as that halfway checkpoint. I mean, I really do feel like that's a great spot for the summit each year that people can take a look at what they thought was going to be happening the first half of the year, and then take a look at what's going to happen next. And I think also this point that we're at with the adoption of AI, with the regulatory side, so many aspects of it moving forward that will impact the energy sector. We're finished comment periods on things like Part 108. We're just opening the door to some of these issues around foreign made robotics. So, we're just so many different pieces there that are moving forward. And I think just like you saw, and we're kind enough to mention the packs of quads that we had, I think you're going to see quite a few humanoids this year. We've got a lot of good use cases that are coming about on offshore platforms, welding with humanoids. So I
Yeah.
think that's going to be an exciting aspect as well. So I think it's really going to be a lot of fun to see everybody in the industry and so many new people who are coming for these related areas and new technologies.
Yeah, I have to say, Sean, your event too is one of the few that I remember seeing some pretty, like at least one pretty ginormous drone. I remember taking a picture of it. I had a purple suit on and I was like standing in front of it. Japan, I can't tell you how many big drones there were. I mean, really, really, really big. And a lot of them targeting the energy sector. By the way, articles coming out about this here soon. But I was telling everybody about you, Sean. I'm like, if you guys want to break into the US market, y'all need to be going to Houston. If you can't make it this year, you got to go next year. But yeah, a lot of these Japanese companies are making ginormous drones for energy, including, this is really interesting. And I don't know why it surprised me, because when you think about beyond visual line of sight, a little tiny quad isn't going to cut it, right? In terms of battery life and all of that, right? Like, they're making really, really big drones for like power line inspections. I mean, talking big. In fact, they had a hydrogen drone, the only one I've seen outside of Israel, Heaven Drones.
Hmm.
There's a group out of Japan making that specifically. It's like a tricopter. It's not huge, but it's hydrogen. And I was like, wow, this is cool. So really neat stuff. I mean, this sector, critical infrastructure energy, is really booming. So on that note, now, we kind of look back 2026, first 6 months, looking ahead, July onward through the end of the year. What do you have on tap after your summit? And what do you see in the pipeline?
Yeah, so we're going to be having several of our EDR Connect member meetings will be going on around various topics, things like fabric maintenance, which for those of you who don't use jargon. That's basically cleaning and preparing and painting assets that need to be done at height, which typically requires scaffolding and or rope access, which is risk. So that's a big area that we're looking at. It's actually bigger than inspection when it comes to dollars for energy asset owners.
Wow.
Uh, and then we're also obviously going to be covering things deeper online, I think, with our counter UAS. I think that story is going to continue to evolve and grow. So we're going to be seeing at least one online forum around that. And then we're going to be doing an industrial intelligence forum where we just focus on the data and how people are taking the data to make it actionable from the asset owner and service provider level. So that'll be a live one-day event in this fall as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be taking bots and brews on the road. I mean, we've got to start showing up where people need us outside of Houston.
I love that. I feel like, was it at Commercial UAV that you held a little kind of mini bots and
We
brews?
did. Yeah.
Yeah,
So we've got a
yeah.
couple of them this summer that are going to be going on. We're looking forward to doing one in San Antonio around the big API inspection event, and then we're looking to be in Las Vegas. So we certainly will try to co-locate where people are gathering.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. We'll be doing our annual flash mob networking happy hour. I feel like I'm up to year 6 on that.
Wow.
I just had someone email me like, "What are we doing?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I got to figure out when Spandex Nation is playing." So more to follow, everybody. Check it out. Just follow Sean, follow me. And on that note, how would you suggest people really connect with the EDRC? What's the best entry point? If they're an energy company or operator and they're not connected yet?
Yeah, easiest is by far go to edrcoalition.com because
Yeah.
that's going to give you access to everything you need to know about our events, our membership. It's got just obviously the typical chiclet apps for LinkedIn, and you can
Yep.
sign up for the newsletter there as well. And so much of that really is at no charge, all the digital. And so hopefully people find some good value out of that. And we love to hear what you're up to in your projects and stay engaged.
Awesome, awesome. And one last deep thought thing from you here, Sean. What's the one thing you would say to any autonomous system company that's trying to sell into the energy sector right now about how the market actually works? What's your one thing that they need to know?
Yeah, so I would absolutely love to say we actually have 2 sessions this year with asset owners that are going to be talking about this.
Wow.
So that's how important it is because a lot of them are moving drones and robotics out of their R&D budgets into their OpEx and CapEx budgets. So it's literally going into their maintenance plans. So the energy asset owners are ready to adopt technology at a rapid pace. So that's the good news for any OEM or startup that's looking to get out there. So that's very important, and you're going to be able to hear that on the Expo floor at Innovation Zone. And so we've got some great things going on there. Secondarily to that is, you need to do the crawl, walk, run. Okay. So you need to understand the energy asset owners and what they're looking for so you can understand how to help them solve their problems. Because once again, now you're competing for budget. So it's got to solve a business challenge. So
Yeah.
that's critical, I think, in learning that and making sure you understand your customer in that crawl, start stage. And then the walk stage, get those proof of concepts, get out there with different organizations who are accelerators in the industry that can help you get connected, including ourselves. We certainly are in that mix that can get your story out there to the asset owners and help them understand what you do. And then run, you're showcasing. It's time to show the use cases and what you can do because you have done proof of concepts and deployed. If you do those steps as fast as you can, you're going to go to market and really be involved in the energy industry faster than you probably would have guessed. But you have to go through those steps.
Well, even how did you phrase it? The materials, what
Fabric
the
maintenance.
fabric maintenance? Like if you're not in this sector on a daily basis like you are, Sean, that's a problem that sector needs to solve. And
Huge.
it's almost like, when you think about just kind of even real estate or just building maintenance, and the facade, inspections, which is so niche and actually really important and requires a certain skill set to perform in terms of drone operations. That is another, that's a great example, I think, of following you to understand what are the problems these folks are needing to solve. Because I agree with you, Sean, sometimes people create a solution in search of a problem. It's just like, well, okay, like you need to understand your client base and what they actually need, and then kind of innovate to that. So really, really cool. Love what you do. All right, we're coming to a close here. In fact, maybe we're 1 minute over. How can people learn more, find out about EDRC, and connect with you before we dial off, Sean?
Sure. So once again, go by the website, edrcoalition.com. And then for me personally, LinkedIn by far. On obviously, like everybody else, every day, I try to answer every message, that I can. And so happy to help people as they explore different opportunities. And so please hit me up on LinkedIn. You can find me either through Energy Drone Robotics Coalition or Sean Guerre. So you can find me either way.
All right, and just for everybody out there, it's no coincidence that this is Energy Month, that it falls in the same month as the Energy Drone Robotics Coalition, that we're going to be doing the live stream from there. And oh, by the way, at the end of the month, we have one of Sean's colleagues that's going to be on our full crew newscast as well, that's focused on energy ops. So this month is all energy all the time. Really excited to be collaborating with you, Sean. And Sean and his group are Autonomy Global Media Partners. So we're really thankful for that partnership as well. And thank you, everybody out there that has watched and listened today. That's all she wrote for now. We are out here.